Coming to you from the city of the weird. Exploring topics from the esoteric and unexplored to dimensions unknown. Shining a light of truth on the darkest corners of our reality. Welcome to the Curious Realm.
Well, hello everybody, and happy Tuesday night. Hope everybody is doing well. Hope all of you out there had a great Palm Sunday. Hope you had a great Palm Monday. Maybe got to flip a table over or two. Yesterday was, just so you're aware, folks, yesterday was the day that Jesus flipped the tables over at the temple. So, if you are a Bible-going, Easter-going person, hope you had a great Palm Monday. Hope you're looking forward to a great Triduum in Easter season. I myself have our family reunion. The Cajun side of my family gets together every couple years, and it's always fun. There's like a good 50 of us. It's a huge family picture, pocking eggs, eating food, all kinds of things. So can't wait for that. I hope you and your family have things scheduled as well. Speaking of schedules, we have an amazing roster of guests coming up. We have just stacked things, as y'all know. Typically the beginning of May, I am gone for clients for a good 2-3 weeks. So there will be 3 weeks of pre-recorded shows coming up, and I've been stacking up all the pre-record guests for the second segments. And man, we have a great, we have Daniel Brinkley coming up, Hakeem Isler, our good friend from Cy Games, Brad Olson, Lynn Buchanan. Some great topics, man. Great topics. It's going to be awesome. Our guest tonight, I am so happy to welcome back in the second part after commercial break. Gretchen Cornwall's new book finally came out. Finally. I know she probably felt like I'd been bugging her, but you know, some of my guests know about it. There's a few of them that about every 3 or 4 months I'll poke and be like, hey, what are you doing? You want to come back on the show? You want to talk? And she had been working on this book in almost dead silence for like 2 years. Codes of the Hidden King. It is about how Francis Bacon encoded all kinds of codes, cryptography, things like that into the King James Bible of 1611, into artworks, into possibly the works of Shakespeare, to show that he was not only the unheard of son of Queen Mary and Francis II, but also from the Merovingian bloodline of Jesus. So fascinating stuff in the second part of the show tonight. I cannot wait to dig into that with you guys. It's going to be great. In the first part, we are welcoming from the Monroe Institute, Luigi Sciambarella. He is the residential and outreach trainer. As many of you know, I am a binaural beat musician myself. Binaural beats are a huge part of my life. I make therapy music for paranormal experiencers, all kinds of things. The Monroe Institute is where I heard about this stuff. This is what I first found probably back in the early 90s. Was when I first ran across the work of the Monroe Institute in a book that I'd been taking abnormal psychology and had heard about some of this stuff, and found a book that referenced some of the work done at the Monroe Institute. And I was fascinated by it. And it was probably about 6 months later, Luigi, that I found the Voyager XL. They used to sell. Oh, wow. They used to sell this little jobber at like Sharper Image, and it came with a pair of glasses that you put on with LEDs in them. That it reinforced the binaural beat, and that was like 1993 that I got these, and fell in love with it. It was literally, and for the simplicity that is. It was really cool to find the work that y'all did over at the Monroe Institute and the truly intensive work that the creators of this and progenitors of this have done. So How did you first come to be involved with the Monroe Institute to begin with, Luigi?
Just messing around while I was at university. Um, I'd had early experiences that were kind of strange. I saw my dead grandmother when I was 7 years old,
Oh,
and
wow.
that kind of both shocked and reassured in equal measure, because I realized very early on that death wasn't something to be feared and final, and actually
Hmm.
there's a continuation of consciousness. And so I became interested in that, but then didn't really have an avenue to explore it. But it was always at the back of my mind. And when I went to university to study psychology, I wanted to know what the state of the union was with understanding these different states. And there wasn't really much. I mean, in the mainstream, it was kind of, dismissed essentially. And so I started to read around the subject and came across hypnosis actually, and I started to do a lot of self-hypnosis, so moving into deep trance states.
Hmm.
And from that, I started to have kind of regular out of body experiences, which then kind of went back and forth with lucid dreams, and through that I found out about the Monroe Institute and Bob Monroe's work, and I just devoured Journeys Out of the Body, his first
Yeah.
book, and
Yeah.
else. And then I was like, oh my God, I've got to go to this place. It's an actual institute where you can learn this stuff. And they've been doing it, studying it systematically for then it was like 40 years or something. So, it was pretty remarkable that you could do this. And so then I'll give the short version. I went several times to the Institute and I thought, why don't more people know about this? And I was hoping that somebody would pop up in England. I mean, that's where I'm based, and nobody did. So then I thought, well, maybe I should do it. And then I did. So in 2010, I became a trainer, was called an outreach trainer. So running weekend workshops in particular.
Too cool.
And then I became a residential trainer. Yeah, you can get a bit of my backstory and on the site. And bit by bit, I've just been pulled into more and more things with the institute. And I'm a board member, and I'm also the chief R&D officer as of last year. So very much interested in the where we can take our technology and who we can collaborate with. The evidence-based approaches, so objective and subjective research. So yeah, I'm very, very immersed in Raw at the moment.
Well, and once again, the technology that you guys are using now, audio-wise, is absolutely phenomenal. It is next level stuff, and especially with the world as an audio engineer myself, things like that. Like you can see all my synths over my shoulder.
Yeah.
The world of immersive audio specifically has gone some amazing places over the last 5 years. Just spatial algorithms that have come out, even hard gear that helps separate those things has just advanced hugely. Let's I guess begin at the beginning. For those out there who may not, there's a lot of people who tune in regularly, but I'm sure that there's a lot of people that are tuned in for the first time tonight as well, Luigi. How does this technology work? Why? Because this is always the reaction that I've gotten from people when I tell them what I do with binaural beats and why I do it.
Yeah.
They're like, why would you want to do that with your brain? Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to go and toy around with that?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. Let's flip it.
Yeah.
Flip the question. So let's go back to what Bob Monroe was doing and why binaural beats came on as a solution to a problem. Bob Monroe was a businessman. He worked in radio, and to cut a long story short, he set up a research division to look into sleep learning. Is it possible to learn things while you sleep?
Yep.
And the immediate problem with that, and the answer is actually yes. Not quite what was going on at the time. You can get a lot of unconscious priming during sleep, and then if you cover stick, but that came later. But the prime problem that you have when you're doing sleep research is that you need your subject to be asleep. So there was a problem with the paradigm and in its infancy. You know, how do we train people to actually get to sleep so that then we can see if we can do any sort of sleep learning? And so Bob started to already play with hypnosis. You know, can we go into deeper trance states? And he was doing a lot of auto-suggestions, you know, so affirmations of himself and so on, and playing with different sort of sounds like pink noise, white noise, you know, just fill in the background. You see this in the Gansfeld studies and various other things. But it was, so he was having these spontaneous out-of-body experiences in the late 50s. He didn't know what the heck they were. And that came out of that research. I mean, like, as he was doing the sleep research, he spontaneously found himself having out-of-body experiences. They weren't targeting them at the time. It was just something that happened, and it freaked him out. And then when he realized that that state wasn't going to kill him, then he became curious and wanted to research it. And he invited people to come as volunteers. Let's muck around. Let's see what we can explore together. Let's see if we can induce this state and where it leads us, and so on. And two of the volunteers were one was an engineer, and one was a physicist. I mean, you know, they were like, you know, in education, you know, so they're students pretty much at the time, not fully established, but, you know, they were getting there in their careers, right? So they were interested in helping Bob to set up this lab and maybe do some engineering and what the physics might be and so on. And I actually had the pleasure literally last week of meeting the engineer. So Dennis Menerich is, he was I was at an event in Charlottesville about the late in the research at Monroe, and he was in the audience, and which is just awesome. He found out about binaural beats. He'd read a paper that, you know, the binaural beats had been discovered in the 19th century, and then Oster ran a paper at the beginning of the 70s, which Dennis found, and he thought, I wonder if we could use binaural beats, and I'll talk about that in a moment, to help to get into these deeper states of consciousness. So these like in-between states, like threshold sleep states, or like borderland sleep states, to help to maybe induce this kind of experience. So he was the original designer of the actual binaural technology. So Bob was then, you know, calibrating. The physicist was Tom Campbell, who then went on to write My Big Toe and come up with all the physics theories of these expanded states of consciousness. So, I mean, there's some seriously deep pioneering work going on with just those three. You know, Bob was providing the context and the lab, and those two were just mucking around, and Bob was giving them tasks and so on. So, super cool stuff. And that's how it started. Binaural beats are an auditory illusion that happens when you present two sounds in stereo isolation, so separately to each ear, and your brain hears the differential, so the difference between the two sounds, and starts to pulse at the differential. So this was the finding. It wasn't just about binaural beats, but the frequency following response was a really major milestone in terms of how to use this. And what the frequency following response relates to is, right now, your brain is cycling many frequencies, and they cycle hertz. And if you have an EEG on your head, electroencephalogram, electrical signals on your brain, you can measure those cycles. And so if you're in sleep, those cycles are really slow. We talk about slow wave sleep, you know, maybe 0.5 to 3 cycles per second. When you're in deep sleep, those are the delta cycles. And so if you want somebody to fall asleep, what you can do is you can present a binaural beat frequency, you know, carrier frequencies, where you have maybe like 200 hertz in one ear and 203 in the other. And then the brain works out the differential of 3 cycles per second. And then after a short period of time, the brain starts to create a stronger pulse at that 3 cycles per second. And therefore that corresponds to the delta waves. And therefore you start to get drowsy and move into deep sleep stages. Now, what you can also do is layer the mixes. So it's not just that you're playing two sounds. You can play layers of sound to support other frequencies as well. So maybe you want to go and support somebody at like the theta boundary, like 4 cycles or 6 cycles per second. So there would be carrier frequencies playing in each ear to create a 6 hertz theta. But you might want to also help the low beta frequencies, or, so 13, 14 cycles per second, which are excellent for concentration. So you can pay attention and be aware of what's going on in those theta states. So this is the thing that makes it really interesting, because normally we're not aware, we're not paying attention when we go into dreamlike spaces, or when we go into sleep-like spaces, or when we're in higher mystical states that you experience, say, with gamma synchrony. That is something that is typically, gamma, maybe you would be more conscious, but usually in dreaming, for instance, you're not. So if you in what's going on in dominant theta frequencies, you can have effects like lucid dreaming, where you're conscious of being in a dream. So we start to enter some of these beneficial states of consciousness, some of these expanded states of awareness that then give us insights on what might be going on in our lives, and then we can apply them in our physical life experience. We can explore dreams on the inside. So what does a dream interpretation mean? Rather than doing it from the outside, you interact with it while it's happening. And you can also have things like out-of-body experiences, which can help people to get past that kind of fight or flight system, the fear of death, as I'd mentioned, like the experience that I had when I was 7 and so. So what is the benefit of like getting your brain to do it? Well, your brain is usually sporadically firing off throughout most of the day.
Yeah, it does it regularly. You just, you are so conscious that you are bypassing it. Like, you consider it a daydream. You consider, and that's what I say all the time. Like, our brain wants to be in a state of rote hypnosis. If you drive to work regularly, like, you are in a state of hypnosis.
Yeah, very much so.
Point. And you may wake up and be like, oh, there's my exit. But you don't have to think about that.
Absolutely not. And I mean, those trances don't require just counting down from 10 to 1 or 1 to 10 or whatever. I mean, there was a study done in Harvard in, I think it was about 2014, that showed that nearly 47% of the time we're daydreaming.
Yeah.
And when we do that, so the more people daydream unconsciously, they're not trying to, work on a problem and consciously direct their mind into sort of more of a fantasy sort of creative space. If they're doing it unconsciously, then the more you daydream, the more you ruminate, the more depression and anxiety you have. Left unregulated is mind. So one of the things that we can do, I mean, and daydreaming can be very, very useful for learning, for instance. But daydreaming, we just move into these trance states. So like almost half of the time you're in trance. And so just think about what you're exposing yourself to, usually within half of your day. You might be looking at the news. You might be looking at things that are absolutely going to condition and texture your lived experience, because you are just not present. So then you might pick up on kind of energy patterns, you feel more stressed and angry. There's a lot of rage baits on social media, absolutely trying to go right into that programming. And so here, this is actually a tool to, it's not about putting yourself in trance. You're actually taking yourself out of a trance and using these tools beneficially to actually move out of habitual tendencies that are actually really destructive, typically destructive for most people, in terms of the anxiety and depression that it often causes, even at low levels.
Well, and it's very interesting to hop back for a second. You mentioned that this all came about while he was trying to figure out how to help people learn. And it's funny because that's how I came across his work, was
Right.
I was making like basically subliminal learning tapes for myself in the end of high school and the beginning of college. Now, granted, later on I realized a lot of the way that I learned from making those tapes was I was writing out what I was going to say, and then I read it and said it out loud. Like, you're already engaging two different forms of learning in your brain. Like,
Right.
once I took my education classes to be a teacher and learned like tactile learning, visual learning, auditory learning, it was like I was already engaging two of those systems before I listened to a tape on repeat while I went to sleep. But I was looking for the side of hypnosis to get myself to the point of being more receptive while I was asleep. And that led me to lucid dream work. That led me to all kinds of things, which, yes, eventually led me to the Monroe Institute, led me to these things. And the idea that not only can we influence the brain, but we can train the brain to do these things. And that's kind of how I explain to people when they ask me how binaural beats work. And I'll normally give them the example of a sound bath. Like, you know, you're pretty familiar with the chakra system and the idea of like a singing bowl, right? It's like that's a sound bath where you're being exposed to a very specific frequency to attain something. And yes, your brain will entrain to that frequency while it's there. No different than you and your buddy walking down the hall. Eventually, you're going to hit the same footstep, you know, and your brain will link into that. However, as opposed to the fact that your brain's going to respond to that signal when it hears it, binaural beats trains your brain to create the signal when it needs it.
Yes.
So as opposed to going to like a sound bath and going and getting a massage with sound, it's like taking your brain to the gym with sound, and truly beefing it up. So when you're talking about trying to get rid of traumas, things like that, that is a huge, huge step into that realm.
Very, very much. I also work as a psychotherapist, and I've often used these tools and snow and so on, but it can very much enhance the process of immersion, essentially, and the receptivity that comes from using binaural beats, or, you know, what we're using now as Monroe Sound Science, which is developed from the original technology. There's a, when we start to use sound, I mean, everything's vibration. So here we're using very specific vibrations that are beneficial to you. Sometimes people are exposed to sounds that are not particularly beneficial, right?
Yeah.
So like loud bangs and screaming or whatever else, right? Your body's going to respond to that. You know, we're mostly water. We vibrate. You know, we're sometimes it's like, you know, we're kind of really related to a cucumber. We're anxious cucumbers with eyes, you know, and so that frequency that goes in can actually affect us in some ways. So when we start to target frequencies that are more related to healing, to supporting relaxation, you know, in that sense, you know, it's not a magic bullet, you know. I mean, if you're saying to yourself, is this going to work? Am I doing this right? I don't know if this will work on me. Then you're increasing beta frequencies in your brain. You're going to take yourself out of the target frequency. So what it is about the binaurals or whatever technology that is using frequency-based modulation in some way, is what we're trying to do is allow a non-invasive technology to guide our brains into beneficial states. So this is not a drug. It's not like you can habituate to it. Your brain can accept or reject it. So then you can allow yourself to sink in and enjoy the journey of it, or you can be very directed with it if you're doing some problem solving and you're using some of those lower beta frequencies to help with concentration. So you can be very passive or very active in how you engage with it. Unlike when you use a drug, which actually keeps the full journey of the drug effect. You know,
you're along for the ride with the drug.
Yeah. So what we're constantly exploring is where can we use this technology, in which applications, what can we use that that might be helpful for people in different contexts, in different ages, for instance. And that's really where, you know, Bob Monroe started as saying that the binaural beats were designed to be training wheels. It's for you to get a feel for, your brain learns and entrains, and you get a feel for what it's like to get into these optimized states of being. So it's like a biohacking, neurohacking before it was even a field.
Yeah.
And then you don't need to listen to the sound technology in order to bring those states on.
Exactly.
That's the beautiful bit. You know, you don't have to depend on it. It's not like a drug. And you know what? Sometimes people think that that's quite alien. It's like, what do you mean you can entrain to it? But if I think of like my favorite person in the world, whoever that might be, I can then bring all these kind of beneficial effects, physiology changes. If I'm thinking of someone who I really don't like, then I get angry. You know, the adrenaline and cortisol is released in my system. I'm not telling my body to release certain hormones and fire off, you know, neurotransmitters and whatever. I'm just thinking about the thing, the person, and the physiology follows. So there are things that we can think about that benefit us and the things that don't, you know, and you literally change your body by what you're thinking and feeling into. So the binaural beat works in the same sort of way, you know, that if what we're putting in is going to impact our physiology, which is then going to actually impact on the sorts of thoughts and feelings that you have. And so there's this vicious cycle that can develop, or we can develop a virtuous cycle where we say, no, I'm going to detox from that and you know, decondition from that. But instead of just trying to push things away, I can cultivate something else in the opposite direction. And this is the beauty of using this technology, because it's, you know, regular meditation has been shown to have tons of beneficial effects. You literally rewire yourself. Within 6 to 8 weeks, you can have measurable changes in the structure of your brain, how it interrelates different areas, especially the ones that are involved in self-reflective awareness. And that's with like an 8-week mindfulness practice. You know, here we're enhancing that by adding audio signals that can help you to stay in the target zone for longer, so that you can get a feel for it and then be able to get there without having to listen to the audio technology. So it's a very empowering tool. It's not trying to create some sort of dependence. A lot of people like to use that because it just feels nice to be in that state when you've got the headphones on, but you could be walking around your day in these states that really help.
Well, and that's just it. It's the idea that you can influence, no different than the emerging field that has been out there of being able to shift things through neurolinguistics, basically shifting the language that you use regularly shifts the way that your brain thinks about something, and thereby changes everything. And it's really fascinating. Yeah, when you start even just switching to using positive terminology instead of negative terminology, stuff like that. And it's pretty common. Like if you take Six Sigma classes, things like that, it's fascinating to see how much of that there is in the corporate field, and just in their general vernacular and the way that they speak with each other. Because at that point you've engaged the brain in a different way and in a non-combative way. You've immediately set up a bridge of conversation, not a bridge of combat, of paradigm. And it's very easy. And it's, you know, we talk a lot about PK on this show. We talk a lot about things like that. And it's the idea of not aligning your thought with the idea of an outcome. It's the idea, because that once again is engaging your logical brain, and that's not what's going to get your brain to this level. That's not what's going to give your brain the experience, things like that. If you're locked into that side of logic, then you're not going to be hypnotized if you're busy thinking about being hypnotized. And you have to relax and let the experience happen. So
Yeah, and it's interesting that you talk about PK. You know, one of the things that comes up a lot here as well is the idea that we're engaging parts of our brain that maybe are a little bit quieter than the parts that we're referring to as the logical parts. Now, the thing is that the bit that we often refer to as the logical part of the brain is actually not particularly logical. Because logic requires being able to come up with a story that you match with the here and now lived experience. But what we're actually engaging with is the storyteller of the brain, which is typically what we're referring to as the left hemisphere, which likes to make categories and objects of everything, including yourself. And so everything is thingified, you know, everything's a thing. And when it gets into stories like that, then it actually lives a little bit in the past because it's constantly object matching.
Looking for a frame of reference.
Right. It disconnects from the here and now, and therefore the story might not match what's actually happening. So when you look at when you're doing remote viewing experiments, you know, you're trying to get information about a target at a distance, you know, what's in the envelope, and I can't use my physical senses, then information starts coming in, and immediately that storyteller, the bit that, you know, is often labeled as the ego, starts to get in the way and say, oh, I know what this is.
And
you know, there's a shape, and oh, it must be a car.
And thank God for a monitor that reins you in and is like, no. Stop giving it a noun.
That's it. Yeah. Keep the nouns out of there. Don't put it in a wheelbarrow. You know, it's just what is it? What's the carness about this? You know, and you go into the so the ego trained to not jump into storytelling, allow the flow of experience, which is very much a right brain process, you know, being connected to the flow of experience to dominate, and then the left can structure information and write it down and so on, but it's not trying to immediately close it down into an object and a category. So the most effective remote viewing is when you just allow the raw data to come in without trying to put a spin on it. And then if you start to like link things together and label it, the chances are it's not it. You've got it wrong more than likely. But write it down, put it to one side, and then go back to the raw data. And it's interesting also that we can influence and affect our field because we're in one. You know, we are the field. And so you get random event generators. You know, there's an organization that we're working with, which, you know, Weird Technologies.
They're awesome.
The weirdest scope. It was at the side games. I've got a weird lamp here. Weird light, I should say.
I love it.
This is the crystals at the Monroe Institute, so it's 3D printed on it, which is really cool. And you know what we see is that when people come together and they're in a receptive state. So I've just been. I'm actually at the Monroe Institute now. I'm at the Roberts Mountain Retreat, so I'm in the control room behind me. And we just completed what was called the Gateway program. So that's the first program that we do. I had this device running in the background, just measuring stuff. And you know, it's a random event generator. There's two of them inside one of these boxes. So you've got essentially two people flipping a coin, heads or tails, continuously. And they're not talking to each other, but they talk to the box, and then that displays it as a light, or as the weirder scope, we can just gather the data and plot the two streams. And what this, you know, when we look at that, we can start to look for patterns and when things are moving into non-randomness. In other words, there's too many heads or too many tails being thrown by one or both of the devices inside the box. When people come together, especially when they're talking in the group, when they're having meals, we see huge spikes. There was 1,000,000 to 1 against chance spike. That event lasted for 2 hours right after the opening circle. So when people introduced each other and then they were allowed to mingle, we saw this huge spike in the data. And so that's a curiosity. It's like, okay, there's psi effects essentially taking place, because those are anomalies, and we see them like every day, every week when we're running programs. So, you know, lots of minds focusing on something together changes things in the field, and we can measure that. And these devices can help us to do that. but so what? And when I asked that question to myself, it kind of, I had to sit with it a little bit. But then it said, well, what am I actually putting out there? Because I'm constantly, it's not field when we're in a group at the Monroe Institute. We're doing that all the time with everyone around us, and everyone around us is influencing us in that way because we're part of the shared field. So what are we actually putting out there, and are we doing it deliberately or not?
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, for me, it's like, well, if I can evidence it in such a short space of time in a week with participants, this kind of effect, then when I go home, I mean, I have to be a little bit more responsible and conscious about what I'm doing.
Somewhere on my soundboard, I have an applause cue, Luigi, and I should find it for that exact moment, because that is like one of the rallying cries of this show, is the fact of like, you are responsible for the vibration you drag into a room with you. And like every time you enter the space of another person, it's like throwing a ripple into a pond, like throwing a pebble in, and your ripple is going to ripple with theirs, and hopefully they syncopate, and it's good ripples, and it forms a bigger, more beautiful ripple or something. But sometimes the ripples destroy each other. It's not always a pretty pattern when that chaos meets in that kind of way. And it's interesting to see the work that's being done with random generators, things like that. The Institute of Noetic Science has been using them for years. You guys have been using them. Adam Curry has his Entangled app, and I was just checking my app because I've normally got it. I've got the alerts on, but they're mute, but I'll see my screen flash every once in a while. My Entangled app regularly goes off while I'm recording episodes with people. Yeah. It'll give me an alert that like your data has trended.
But what's really interesting, like I teach programs online as well, right? So retreats, and we have the residents. And then, we will launch Gateway Voyage Online, which is a self-paced thing. But are usually, everybody on a screen on Zoom, and then they go away, do the meditation, and they come back. And what I was doing was I was running the Weirdoscope in the background during a virtual retreat. And when I looked at the data, it came back as pretty random. There wasn't anything particularly significant in the data, a few blips here and there, but nothing particularly amazing to write home about. And I found that quite unusual. And I spoke with one of the researchers, and what she told me was, oh, but you didn't include it in the group. So I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, it's an interesting thing that happens, that if you show the participants that, here's Chris, we're going to call the Crystal Chris, and this is part of the group, and it's going to be measuring things, and it's not measuring what we're doing, it's just going to create a lot of zeros and ones, but included in the team, and then go off and do your experiences. Then the data, when we looked at it, it had non-random events that were pretty significant, pretty much on a daily basis, just like they would be on campus. Mm-hmm. So actually, even over a distance, I'm in the UK typically, so 4,000 miles away, or there could be some people on the west or east coast, doesn't matter. They're kind of entangled with it. Now, the physics of this is beyond my pay grade, but I can see it in the data that if you include the device in the group,
absolutely,
then more likely to show the significant data than if not.
We just did that at the Sci Games intensive here in Austin. We had 2 of the weird lights. That was the image of it right there, folks. And it was one of those, like, sometimes they'd both pop up red, stuff like that. It was what? Like the chance, just so you know, folks, the chance of the random number generator going off to something to begin with. The way these lights work, once again, is when the random number rate generators sync and cohere with each other, which should not happen in theory, because they're both utterly random. Right. But when you then have 2 of those systems line up together at the same time, in the same space, that's That's into the billions. That's into the billions of
that's
probability. Yeah.
That's 4 random event generators doing the same thing. Just if you can't get your head around this at home, like when I was looking at the data of just this week that's gone, we got the rainbow pattern going for 15 minutes. There's a rainbow pattern when it started up, but it wasn't that one. It was going for 15 minutes with the really high coherence one. When I looked at the data, it came like almost a vertical line out of the parabola. So it was like super significant. That's why it went to 1,000,000 to one hit and lasted for 2 hours. But the rainbow pattern itself lasted for 15 minutes while we were all there as a group. Imagine two people tossing a coin and throwing heads for 15 minutes straight.
Yeah.
Both of them. I mean, that's literally what was going on. You think that's not random. You would say that that's a biased coin, or like, the coin tossing is somehow weird.
Rigged.
Rigged. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what we're seeing in the data, and it's happening when people are doing this shared experience. And when the Global Consciousness Project started doing that, Roger Nelson. Yeah. This was trying to see if the randomness would go out of randomness when lots of minds were concentrated unconsciously, but a big world event like the Twin Towers or Princess Diana dying, whatever it was. You'd see spikes in the data at that time. So that's why he set up the Global Consciousness Project. HeartMath took that on. There's the Global Consciousness Project too. I know Joe Dispenza just did something with them as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of interest in measuring these field effects. But one of the things that is key then, it shows that you've got to do the inner work, because you're constantly influencing or being influenced by the field. So what we do at the Monroe Institute then is help people to do that inner work. We evidence the group connection, which is a massive part of what we do. But here are some tools that let you move into these states of consciousness that we're typically not conscious in, so that you can then maybe talk to some of those parts of yourself that are just incongruent in some way. You want to do this. If you've ever been in a situation where you say, I don't know what came over me, I don't know why I did that, then it means that there's some part of you that is not communicating with another part. Some parts of you know why you did that and what came over you. So the goal here is to get into conversation with that part, to expand the sense of self. You're not just this physical body. There are layers to the self, and we can access those. We typically access them unconsciously when we fall asleep. Yep. So we go into the dream world and so on, and we expand our consciousness. But you can be very deliberate at expanding your consciousness, like Bob Monroe did with having out-of-body experiences, and many of who followed from that, and you get more insights in yourself, about yourself, and that then can maybe just start to spill out in your sphere of influence, the people around you, your immediate environment, and you start to affect the field in a very positive way. So how you're talking to yourself and finding that alignment within yourself starts to create a resonance in the alignment of those around you and beyond.
Man, we talk a lot about manifestation, things like that. We're getting ready to have Kim LaDeRocher on the show. Cool. She was at the event this last weekend. We just talked with David Tran, one of the perceptualists. His interview will be coming up, and but the whole idea is, and people will say all the time, there are numerous studies that show the positive benefits of prayer, especially group prayer on something. And this is exactly what you're talking about. Now, what people have a problem with is when they pray, what they pray for doesn't happen. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that, you are aligned with what you're praying for, like vibrationally, or that even you're supposed to get what you're praying for. That's a huge supposition of the universe right there. But you're also putting on that full-on right-brained, full-on noun intent. And you've put it inside of this very hard-defined box. And when it doesn't hit that hard-defined box, it's now a miss for you. Instead of seeing the numerous other facets to that, that it may have been answered, that alignment may have happened. It just may not have occurred in the way in which you wanted it to. So even the interpretation of the data given in these circumstances, I think is hugely important. And even when it comes to that larger connection with the class, things like that, using things like the weird light, I think that's exactly what she was saying, was the idea that you haven't allowed it into that part of the quantum field, like as a literal handshake, where it's like, no, welcome to the group yourself, random number generator, because you're never gonna. And I'll reach back here and grab my bent spoons. These are freshly bent by me.
A beautiful cutlery, you can't eat soup with that anymore.
You can't. You
can't take it to a guy.
But here's the thing: with the carpal and cubital tunnel that I have, I also can't actively do that. There's no way with my carpal tunnel syndrome that I would be able to bend that spoon without raging pain. Now, the question is, can I do that all the time? No. It's a right place, right circumstance, right mindset situation, and aligning yourself not to the idea of forcing the spoon to bend, but with the idea of the spoon's just part of the fun. Like, think of the most fun, beautiful thing you've ever done, and feel and be with that moment, and invite that spoon into that moment. Invite that spoon into that moment to share that moment with you.
It's funny with we have a spoon bending program at the institute, and
Alan brought it up.
Who's the chief executive, and I, so this was during the pandemic, right? Alan contacts me and says, would you like to do a spoon bending class with your groups in England? And I said, Alan, come on, bending spoons, some parlor tricks, whatever. But she said, no, look, there's a good success rate, and it's actually got a lot to do with relaxation, healing, how you're talking to yourself, and the spoon bending is almost like an incidental part of the process. So I said, okay, I'll ask the group, right? So I asked the group, and 40 people immediately said, oh gosh, I want to do this, right? So I said, okay, fine. We weren't going anywhere. It was the pandemic, and lockdowns, all that kind of stuff. So I said to my wife, I said, Pam, do you want to do a spoon bending workshop? And she looked at me like, all right, why not? But she said, you're not bending these fortune spoons, right?
You're not bending my good spoons.
Yeah, exactly, right. So they're wedding presents,
Yeah.
So I went to the local supermarket, and I got some forks and I got a cutlery set. And I thought, no, not those ones, because they look like I could easily bend them. And I got some like with a decent gauge to them.
Yeah.
And I thought, right, if anything happens, these are thick. Something's going on. So I went back home and I said, okay, I bought a new set. This is what we're going to do. So roll the next day. I'm teaching the program with Alan, so she's leading it. I'm just providing, supporting actor kind of role because I knew the group. And there's 20 people on the call. My wife's in the room behind me, right? And so Alan's just suggesting to people, there's going to be a section later on, because we started with like an 8-hour day, right? So that's how long the program was. And then we abbreviated it to 5, and then we even did 3 actually. But the 8-hour session, it was a nice spread of a day. And Alan said, but if you ever feel inspired, just pick up the fork or spoon, see if you can play with it a little bit or put it down, right? Don't overthink it. But if you feel inspired, do it. And so there was a relaxation exercise, and then a few people came back on the camera, after the meditation, that they'd bent something, and I'm like, you were doing it off camera. You got to wrench that. I'm not buying it. The next meditation was a healing meditation, right? And my wife comes back, and she'd bent a spoon. It was just literally lopped over, a spoon bent over, and she said, "Oh, I think we bought some cheap crap." Went over.
Yeah.
This went over straight away. Quite realized, how she'd actually, because she just thought, well, I just did that and it just went, and I've got the sibling, you know,
Yeah.
I've got the same set, and I'm going, you know, my knuckles were going white on this thing, right? And I'm going, that wasn't brute force. Now my wife is quite slight compared to me, so I'm thinking, no, that isn't brute force. And she's telling the group like, oh, I think it went over really easy. A wimp could
And
bend it.
that's why, because she didn't think about it. She
There was
didn't have a
nothing about-
limiting thought.
Yeah, and I'm like, please stop talking, you know, saying, oh yeah, any wimp could
It's
bend this.
the
I'm like,
easiest thing in the world.
so like later on in the session, you know, I ended up doing it. And what I found that was really interesting, like I'm a lucid dreamer. I lucid dream regularly. If I want to make something appear in the dream, like a glass or something like that, I have to get one with the dream. I've got my dream character self that feels separate, but I have to kind of merge with it a little bit and feel into it. And then I can make something manifest. And I had this kind of bending going on in my mind. And then I noticed something softening in my hand. But then when I looked down, nothing had changed. And this had happened like cycling back a few times. And I thought, just relax, you know, let it play. And people were bending. Like everybody in the group bent something, which I was astounded by. Normally it's about 8%, which is an incredibly high rate anyway. But when I bent something, I noticed how it went. I mean, obviously, you're manipulating the object. You've got it in your hands. But it went super soft. I put a twist in it. And then I was messing with the tines of a fork. They were just going over super soft. And there's no stress marks on the metal. You know, when I look at it's not like wrenched and you can see the stress. It's molded over. You know, and so that to me was quite a convincer. I even ended up bending something that was plastic, twisting a plastic fork, shattered to pieces, just applying just the tiniest amount.
Yeah,
it went over. So that to me just was a total convincer. And it's not about bending the fork or the spoon. It's what does it mean? As you said, you're kind of in conversation with it. This is part of the field. It's not a solid object, so to speak. You know, that's how it's presenting, but actually there's something richer to that. And if you're doing that with a fork or spoon, which seems really solid, what sorts of thoughts or emotions are you holding rigidly that actually you could soften?
Yeah.
You know, that you bend in some way. So, you know, it really starts to impact the modes of thinking and being and expressing that we have in our daily lives. You know, it's not really about spoon or fork bending. That's just the answer.
Exactly. And you know, honestly, that is what I reassure people about more than anything is not only with this technology and with these programs, but with the whole field of PK. It is as ethical and ethically grounded as you can get. Now, are there other people out there in the medium world, things like that, using parts of this and parts of the community in snake oil ways? Absolutely. But when you're talking about real organizations, IRVA, Monroe Institute, Games, things like that, there is a want of research. There is a mountain of data. Rhine Institute, you know, there is.
You know, I mean, there's just tons of data out there.
Yeah, yeah, and there is a want of collaboration, and even with the military remote viewing program, there were ethical protocols, and there were parts where they were like, you are not allowed to remote influence. You are not allowed to like connect with another person in that kind of way and do something.
You know, I mean, we've got Joe McMoneagle, which we're blessed to have on campus. You know,
absolutely.
such an amazing human being. You know, let alone the abilities that he has.
Yeah.
And he always talks about the ethics. You know, what is it that you would die for? You know, he says. You know, it's like, do you really have strong moral convictions? Because there are boundaries, you know, and there are ways of how you maneuver yourself in these different states. You know, you can play around and whatever, but I mean, are you impinging on the free will of somebody else? You know, and deliberately? Consciously, you're doing it deliberately. I mean, you know, there's a difference, but not that much, really. You know, so these are things, the ethical considerations that are important. And how much of your ego are you putting in there? Now, sometimes that actually acts as a natural immune system for these states. You know, if you're so ego bound. You're trying to force an outcome in a particular way. The chances are it will not happen.
That's right.
If you're doing it purely from that type of will, if you're doing it through connection, if you're doing it through wanting to explore the far reaches of your own consciousness, there's a curiosity, there's a playfulness, there's a desire for self-improvement and so on, then that is going to bring a different energy than if you're saying to yourself, I need to be able to do this so that, then I'll be of value, I'm worthy or whatever it is. That's going to get in the way, so it'll block off the abilities. You might get beginner's luck on the first instance. This happens in remote viewing all the time. Yep. Somebody says, I think I'm going to suck at this. And then they nail the target. I mean, like super nail the target. And then they go, oh, I think I know how to do this. And then they suck. Like the next 10 are just like miles out. And then they go, oh, well, I'm not good at this at all, but I'll have another go. And they're good again. Then it's like when the ego gets away and tries to work out how you did it, that's usually the thing that is going to stop you from really being able to connect at a deeper level because you're in a story.
Yeah. Yeah. And the programs that you guys have put together, Luigi, are absolutely awesome. The technologies that y'all use to implement them are even more incredible. We've got you for about another 5-10 minutes. Let's talk about that real quick. And sure. Because they're especially when it comes to the lights, things like that. There are a lot of things that are commercially available out there, but a lot of things that you also kind of have to warn people about as well. Like not everybody understands that, like, hey, if you have a seizure disorder, you probably shouldn't put those lights on your face. Right. Stuff like that. So what are there caveats to this technology, and what can people do to utilize it properly?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we try to do is provide structured programs. I mean, the education around how to prepare your mind going into these states is really important. So when we teach Gateway, it's not just play some tracks and see what happens. I mean, you can get all of the tracks in that way, but it's really useful to know how to deliberately enter these states. And there's this whole preparatory process, clearing the mind, increasing your vibrational rate, your refresh rate, so to speak, protecting yourself in some way or keeping your energy buoyant, and then setting intention with affirmations. Affirmations work. What we tell ourselves has a great impact on how we think, feel, and behave. So that preparation, then when we start to go into these tests, about your experience and a cultivation of what we do in the programs, and they build on each other, so there's an immersion as well. In terms of the caveats, what I would say is, I mean, some of them are pretty obvious. Don't listen to this while driving, just in case you start to zone out. I mean, I don't think there's anything particularly dangerous, but you could totally zone out, miss your exit, and carry on driving for a few miles out the way. You forget to, when people get ungrounded, then they forget to do stuff. You forget to, I was supposed to go to the grocery store and I drove straight home, and, you can be very absent-minded. So, we recommend not doing that. I would also recommend doing these meditations where you're not having to do something very quickly afterwards. So if you're meditating and something really opens up for you, have you got the processing time, or do you have to quickly get into a car and go to work? That gonna maybe color the day in some way. If you sometimes people listen to this a lot without drinking and eating, that can lead to kind of pressure sensations in the head, because I mean, you gave the kind of workout analogy, like going to the gym.
It is a huge caloric use, use in your brain.
Yeah. So have snacks available. We have snacks all the time available at Monroe. People are just constantly fueling up, not necessarily putting on weight. I mean, maybe they do if they start to overindulge, but they're typically burning that energy off, because your brain is using 20% of your food intake a day. It's a massive energy sink. So, that constant pulsing, the binaural beat or whatever the sound, we use a frequency, amplitude, and phase modulation, and also 3D sound technology.
Yep.
So we use the Dolby Atmos technology and so on as well now. That's making the brain, have a really good workout. Now, if you're not ready for it, you'll just gone, right? So that's typically, but your brain, because it's being worked to make new neurons, so neurogenesis requires sleep and it requires hydration. So you've got to do both of those. So listen to something, and you can do it intensively, but then sleep on it. So if you're doing this at home, and you were doing it like in a gateway program, you'd be listening to 4 or 5 meditations a day, but everything's taken care of when you're on the mountain. Like there's people that are preparing your meals and everything else, so you only have to think about this. Make sure that you've looked after yourself in the background, and then sleep on it. And if you find that, you're getting a headache or something like that, drink plenty of water, get outside, get some fresh air, get grounded, leave it a little bit, sleep on it again, and then come the next day, because each day you're going to be coming back with a new brain, because your brain just updates itself during the night, predominantly. So that's really, the kind of major thing, that can come up. But also connect with a community, because there's a lot of, we've got an Expand app, which we put a community feature on that, just so that people could talk to people on the same wavelength, and say, well, this is what I'm experiencing. Does anyone have anything that they can share, any knowledge about that, and so on, and not be considered weird. That's the thing. It's not fringe. It's something that people do the world around, really.
And in some of these things, Luigi, like I've just experientially going, I have not been through any of the Monroe programs, and I truly want to go through some. I really do. Because the focused way in which they happen, I think, is really great. I have been through a couple of, like, right next to me at Sci Games this last year. I had Monroe Institute on the right, and then I had a gentleman who I know uses Monroe Institute beats and things like that, had like a sound bed with a light that was synced to it. And my God, the programs that he had going, there was one, he wanted to put me through along when we didn't have a whole lot of time. We were both really busy. I was like, well, before doors open today, let's go through a 5-minute experience. Give me just like a 5-minute one. And during probably about the last minute or so, it's hard to judge how long you're in during sessions like that, but it was toward the end of it. I was having all kinds of great, beautiful sensations. And then suddenly I was literally pulled into the cafetorium of my elementary school. Like the general use space that is the cafeteria and the auditorium. Like the cafeteria with the stage in it. And like it was one of the most visceral things in the world. Like I was there. It was no different than when I am lucid dreaming, than when I am fully involved with the dream and can smell and taste things like that. It was fascinating to me. And I mean, I dropped there within 5 minutes.
Yeah. This stuff works. When we were doing the kind of beta testing for the Expand app, we thought, we don't know whether people will respond well to this if they're just dropping into the app and just trying something. So we thought this idea of like Monroe Light, let's see if we can soften maybe the tones of what we're doing. And we very quickly realized there's no such thing as Monroe Light. We can't do it.
Yeah.
and this beta tester, he
Monroe Light is just lame binaural beats like my stuff.
Yeah, it's just... Within 5 minutes, this guy who never had any sort of experience of our tech, within 5 minutes, he had a full-blown out-of-body experience. And, that's rare. That doesn't typically happen, by the way. But it was just like the planets aligned for this dude. And it was just within 5 minutes. I mean, and we thought, okay, if somebody's, if it's meant to be, This stuff works. It helps people to go into these expanded states of consciousness that are incredibly beneficial.
Yeah.
And it can happen really, really quickly. And for some, it's more like, okay, well, this is just generally working on yourself. It's a mental workout that will help to strengthen areas of your mind, your brain, and calibrate you in ways that typically we don't do. Like just the way you go to the gym to strengthen your you strengthen your mind, and this is a really useful tool. You don't have to disappear into a cave or join an ashram to do it. Great, if you want to do that, that's fine. But this is something that you can do for 5 minutes in the morning, just to tune up, and then you go about the rest of your day. And then maybe set an intention at night, because we've got nighttime tracks, we've got daytime tracks,
That's right.
we've got work tracks, and I mean, you name it. There's tons of applications.
Well, and that's just it. It quite literally is a way to the best way to explain it is to tune your brain, and once again to train it to generate what you need when you need it for what the situation is. Because the fact of just to take this conversation full circle before we wrap up, it all started with training your brain to be able to learn. Training your brain to be able to learn faster, to be able to retain better and longer, things like that. So when you're talking about the idea that we can influence that we can change that, like you can use this with kids, you can use it in classrooms, all kinds of things.
Some have done that. We have a professional division, and we've had professional members in teaching situations that are very effective.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just it. It's about preparing the mind for what you're about to do. And that's exactly what the Monroe Institute programs do, is help prepare, whether you're trying to astral travel, whether you're trying to have out-of-body experience, whether you're trying to help relieve traumas from near-death experience. The programs of the Monroe Institute run far and wide, and are absolutely awesome. You can get all kinds of great stuff. Before we let you go, let everybody know where they can go, because there are once again, you're UK based, but you are adjunct out there doing things for Monroe. There's all kinds of places to go take Monroe studies and become a part of it. Now, granted, from what I understand, the wait list on some of them here in the U.S. is a little beefy, a little long.
Yeah. The demand has gone a bit crazy, really. I mean, so many people want to engage, which is wonderful. I mean, it shows that there is actually a global awakening taking place, and that's great to see. And it also creates a capacity issue here. Absolutely. But that's why we developed the Gateway Voyage Online. I mean, we just launched it. I think it was on the 10th of March. So this is purely self-paced. But there's the videos that are filmed with myself and Alan Evans, and we present each of the exercises. We try to recreate the educational experience that happens on campus, and it has all of the guided sessions. So there's 23 guided sessions, and you have the training. It's Bob Monroe's voice mostly on the audios that have been updated with the latest sound science, and you've got access to that indefinitely. It's not just for the week or anything like that. That's the one-time fee, and you've got that, and you can play with that at your leisure. Yeah, it's we really want to get it out there. We want people to be able to engage with these tools as and fit them into their daily lives as much as possible.
Yeah.
But in terms of the programs, I mean, just go on the Monroe Institute website and monroeinstitute.org, and you'll see where we have all the locations. We're trying to add more across the U.S. Our campus here is pretty full for the rest of the year, so we're already putting out our 2027 calendar. But there's also events going on in different places in the U.S. And also, across the world, really. As I said, I mean, I do them in the UK, but there's, programs in Spain, Italy, France, I mean, you name it.
Yeah.
So that will be on the website as well.
Wow. Absolutely awesome. Luigi, I have thoroughly loved this conversation. I would love to have you on again and again and regularly.
Pleasure.
Because y'all are one of the places out there that this stuff updates so fast. The rate at which you guys produce things and update technology and are constantly working with new stuff, it's so incredible. It's so great. So once again, thank you so much. I'll be in touch with links, and I once again would love to have you on again and again to talk about this. This is one of the true causes of my life, is to help people understand that they can change their mind. Like literally, you can change your mind, people, beyond a yes or no, or maybe I don't want sausage today. Like there are real ways that you can change your mind and change the way that you react with the reality around you. So thank you for all that you do, and thank you for all that Monroe does, Luigi.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. You take care. I'll be in touch with links, all that kind of good stuff. Man, incredible conversation, folks. And once again, I am here to tell you, binaural beats, and especially the tracks done by the Monroe Institute, the programs that they have, the programs that they have put together, have come about through decades and decades of hard-fought work, decades and decades of lab work. These are some of the people that I talk about whenever we say that amongst the parapsychological studies that are out there, when it comes to PK, there is tons of lab data. These are some of the people that have created some of that lab data through their studies and through their work. So stop on by, check them out, everybody, monroeinstitute.org. When we come back from this quick commercial break, we will be joined by our good friend, author and researcher Gretchen Cornwall. We will be talking about her new book, Codes of the Hidden King, written with co-authors John Edwards and William Russell. We will be talking about Sir Francis Bacon, his encoding of lost knowledge in the 1611 King James Bible, other artworks, possibly the works of Shakespeare, and how he is the unclaimed son of Mary, Queen of Scots, and Francis II, and from the Merovingian bloodline of Jesus Christ. So we will be getting into that and so much more with Gretchen Cornwall right after this.
The key to good science is good research. At the heart of good research is a good data set. With the field observation and encounter log from Curious Research, you can easily keep track of your investigative information all in one place, making it easier to review cases and readily see comparisons and contrasts between them. Whether out in the woods squatching, in a back room gathering EVPs, or using high-tech gear to track UFO, UAP activity, this easy-to-carry, pocket-sized scientific data log is the perfect companion for any field researcher. You can find your copy of the Curious Research Field Observation and Encounter Log at Amazon.com, or visit the official Curious Realm store at curiousrealm.com/store to reserve your copy for yourself, your family, or a mind that you want to open. That website again is curiousrealm.com/store.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back from that quick commercial break. Thank you so much for staying with us. Also, thank you so much to our sponsors, especially True Hemp Science. If you are a user of CBD products like I am, stop on by True Hemp Science today. Christopher Lynch and True Hemp Science uses phagiric process by which every part of the hemp plant is used. Everything from the seeds, the stems, the buds, the leaves, fiber, every part is used, combusted, and reused in that process, followed again and again, just like alchemists of old, until nothing remains except an amazing phagiric product full of terpene profiles, all kinds of great stuff. Stop on by, check them out. TrueHymnScience.com is the website that you want to go to. Curious7 is the code that you want to use to save 7% off your entire cart of $50 or more. Our guest in this segment, speaking of websites, you can find her work over at GretchenCornwall.com. Her new book, Codes of the Hidden King, is available, folks. You can find it not only at CuriousRealm.com/store, you can find it on her website, GretchenCornwall.com, as well as Amazon.com. I am holding my copy, which I dove into this morning. I'm as typical, I'm 100 pages in by the time I talk to the author, Gretchen. I like to have a good springboard into conversation, but still have enough room to not know the whole story. I don't ever want to spoil the story for myself. I want the author to be able to tell me things and stuff like that. And I want our conversation to be a surprise. So, surprise, welcome back to the show.
Awesome. It's been too long since we've had a conversation, and I'm so relieved, proud, thrilled to be here with you. We always have such an amazing conversation off camera as well. I mean, I think that's where a lot of good stuff happens in the green room. So I'm really pleased to be here and proud to be talking about the book and with my two co-authors. They're both geniuses. They're both just brilliant individuals. Their first publication, mine, my fourth actually.
Yeah.
Covers an awful lot of ground. They were working on this for a year before they brought me into the mix and asked me to take on the task of lead writing, basically just merging together our respective research. And the numbers of meetings that we had, for weeks and weeks on end, were incredible. I have to say, so much didn't make it in the book either, because we had to draw a line under it somewhere. But we've got a whole back catalog of information that, just by constraints of printing a book that is affordable, had to be axed. And this book, we've had, it's, we wanted to give people an experience. The great masters of the past, the great artists of the past, used art to teach, to share experiences with, to move people, to change consciousness. So we are hoping, with our confidence, but also our humility, that this book is a portal to new experiences for the reader, both informational as well as spiritual, experiential, and new understandings on our historical past, and some very, very, for those who have shaped our language, the English language. Yeah,
and we'll be getting into some of that this evening. One of my favorite things about all your books, truly, Gretchen, the price on this book is absolutely amazing at $30. Number two, the fact that all of the pictures are full color.
Yeah.
Like everything, which is so hugely important, whenever you're talking esoteria, whenever you're talking about artwork that is trying to exude an esoteric message. A lot of that is displayed in true and vivid color. The colors themselves, their placement against each other, next to each other, what they're used as, plays such a huge and important role in the esoteric message of things. And like you said, the fact that so much of this message of this book is cryptographic, which is very much the work of John and
William.
Yes. Not so much the work of you. And I definitely want to have them on to talk about the cryptographic element of it, the idea that there are messages encoded in the 1611 King James version of the Bible, What I found fascinating, though, is that the real bulk of the message of this book is how Francis Bacon is the secret son of Mary Stuart and Francis II, and in the lineage of Jesus Christ through the Merovingian bloodline. And that is just massively huge. You could not get a more bombshell on two fronts. And we had the conversation pre-show, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit on this. I'm a member of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. I have friends from college that I'm not going to say we get into fisticuffs. No fisticuffs are ever involved, Gretchen, but they definitely highly defend their bard and the fact that he is who history says he is. It's like, I do not presume that a cabbage farmer would know the ins and outs of Victorian royal society. You know, I think that it would have to be somebody from the royal court. So despite the fact of me thinking much more of Edward de Vere's, the fact that y'all have brought up Francis Bacon, which has always been there, they've been front runners, both of them, pretty much head and head for the longest time. And there is some great information brought up in this book to that fact. But the idea that things even going back to Shakespeare are proof to this fact that there is a secret coded message, that there is something else going on, and that there is an esoteric message that is woven inside of tapestries, that's woven inside of artwork from the period that brings this across, all kinds of things. And you shared tons of slides with us today to go through, which I can't wait. So let's get into your side of the research of this amazing new book, Codes of the Hidden King, and what this means as far as the bloodline of Francis Bacon and the tie to Mary Magdalene and Christ.
Well, this is new, that's for certain.
Yeah.
I've not come across anyone else making these statements. Now, John Edwards spearheaded, no pun intended, this project. And basically, he was, the Oak Island researchers all tend to group together and talk together. And one of our most leading lights is Jake Roberts, who is very deep into Baconian code and has his own podcast about it. And John Edwards was following that. William Russell was also in the group. And Edwards thought, well, wait a minute, I've come across something here. And I think there's something to it. And he put it in front of William. And William thought, no, this is a bridge too far. And I'm going to disprove this. But what ended up happening, and forgive me, William, if I'm speaking out of turn and putting words in your mouth, but from memory, from what I recall, that between the two of them, he couldn't disprove it, but started proving it through Baconian code, through the actual moments in the King James Bible, the 1611 version. And so, they worked on that for a good year. Fervently, realized that they needed some help. It was a big project. And then they invited me to take a look at what they had been doing. And I thought, my God, I have not seen new information regarding Mary Magdalene in years, real new, mathematically based, historically based information about her in years. And of course, I would like to add, I've made original discoveries of my own, such as Mary Magdalene tied to Cassiopeia. I've found artwork going back from the 1600s all the way back to the 12th century, venerating Mary Magdalene as Cassiopeia. And of course, that goes even further than that into Melusine. But I'm straying a little bit off the topic here, but Francis Bacon knew who he was, certainly took on board what what this information had to say about him, and we believe he was a walking master, definitely in charge of the spear shakers, of which Shakespeare would have been one of them. It was such an amazing project. I think we all three of us are just exhausted by the time it came out. It's as if we poured our life force energy into it, and at the expense of other areas of one's life that are important. It is definitely part of the fabric of our being in these pages.
It's voluminous. Voluminous, Gretchen. The research that has been put into. I'm only 100 pages into it, and the places that it has gone already are wow.
Well, for coming from you, that means a lot to me, because you are a true scholar. And that means a lot to me that you would say that. So, I wanted the book to tell a story that people could grab hold of, but I also wanted it to be visual. The guys certainly were on board with that. I had a lot of free rein, but we were also very much accountable to each other, and brought our best to the table. It's been edited, re-edited, edited again, put in front of some very steep critics who did their best to knock the stool out from under us, and then we would go back to the drawing board and make sure we knew what we were talking about. So this is our best, a culmination of years of research between all three of us, our respective gifts and backgrounds, which are considerable. John Edwards has got an amazing background in symbology as a researcher. He is a teacher himself. He has been on the Curse of Oak Island many times. William Russell has the mind of a steel trap. He is quite the mathematician and an expert historic code breaker. There's no way I'm even going to try to keep up with these guys. And we just brought our A game to the table, and I was thrilled to make some of my own discoveries. And you're looking at one of them, Mary Stuart. We did not know everything there was to know about her. So we're finding out that Francis Bacon believed that Mary Magdalene had children, and that he is a descendant, that Mary Stuart is a descendant. And there he is at the feet of his mother, Mary Stuart, as a young teenager, with his twin brother, Walter Raleigh. And this is also an issue that has come out with the code work that's been done by this group of individuals who basically, this book is not about Oak Island, but this is about the reason Oak Island exists. Mm. So if you want to understand Oak Island, read this book. Well, and it will tell you everything about it you need to know.
That is one of the long-held mythos about the treasure of Oak Island, and what's in the money pit is possibly the lost works of William Shakespeare, the original works of William Shakespeare, because that's something that we've talked about with Catherine Children and members of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. Even whenever I went to the conference a year or so ago, it's the fact of there are zero surviving original manuscripts. What exists are pieces that have been put together and stuff like that have been assembled. But there are no surviving original manuscripts of anything from the hand of Shakespeare himself. So the idea of being able to let's handwriting match the works of either Francis Bacon or Edward de Vere's, to be able to do either one, you can't. So it's fascinating. And it really does leave to go. It could be the fact because, yes, Edward de Vere's was also involved with the theater, all kinds of things. His uncle was a publisher. stuff like that. So the idea that there may have even been more than one Shakespeare, that there may have been, like you're saying, like a group of Shakespeares.
The Spear Shakers.
Yeah, the Spear Shakers, because that was Edward de Vere's actual like lance fighting name was the Spear Shaker. So it's fascinating when you dig into these things and when you start finding these connections. So the fact that this is brought in, once again, I am looking at this stuff with new eyes. I'm looking at it from the point of view of, let's see how it relates to this parenthood and this blood lineage. So let's start going through this artwork that you sent, Gretchen, because you sent quite a presentation of artwork, all kinds of things. And because this is part of the technical code as well, despite being cryptological, it's the fact of these things are hidden in esoteric ways through visual art. So let's start breaking these down.
Awesome. Now, one thing that's interesting about Mary Stuart is that when she was supposedly kidnapped by Lord Bothwell, she was, of course, recaptured, and perhaps she loved him. He certainly wanted to marry her. She certainly became an object. If you could grab hold of Mary Stuart, you could be king of Scotland. So the rumor is that she, having been recaptured, and of course Bothwell was executed, was that she miscarried twins. And this is an interesting thing to consider because it's women that determine whether or not they're going to, there will be twins. It's something that a woman is either capable of or not capable of. So having more than one set of twins is likely. So here we have that legend, and in the work that John Edwards and especially William Russell have done, the concept that she had twins very early on, and I found supporting artwork for this, a coded work of art. I won't show here. I'm gonna let people. There's a coded work of art that Mary Stuart's godmother, if you will, had commissioned. And it's a really interesting work of art. And I won't go into it here, but we'll get into the lead up of it. But yes, so I had fun, with the evil that is AI by redeveloping a very famous portrait of her when she's 17 with two boys at her feet. And also I did this because I wanted to talk about the AI filters of the day and how they were experimented with. And I go into that in the book as well, where these people are depicted with different eye color, different hair color. Hilliard, the painter Hilliard, portrays Bacon as a 17-year-old with light greenish blue eyes. And yet he's gone down in history in later time as having maybe brownish or dark or hazel eyes. So, they were all experimenting with light, with their hair color and their eye color. And I think this is down partly to do with either shrouding their lineage, who their parents were in general, or what story they wanted to tell. So, and the master of this was actually Diane de Poitiers, the shameless goddess of the hunt of Chateau Fontainebleau. So I shared an image of her coming up here as well. But she, roll forward, and I'll try to remember what I'm hoping to impart here. There she is. Okay. Is that the next one? I'm sorry, I didn't mean for you to bounce around.
No, that's okay.
She is incredible. She was actually responsible for the education of Mary Stuart, believe it or not. She had a lot of power over Mary Stuart's education. Now, Diane de Poitiers and the king, Henry II, they were enacting the Platonic Mystery School at Fontainebleau. And I've had the distinct privilege of having set foot there in the last year. It is a testament to Platonic Christianity. And this is infused with the Greek world being brought up and into that royal setting. And it is literally a new Rome. And he intended Francis I, who developed it and was the patron of Leonardo da Vinci, intended it to be the new Rome, with the Platonic Mystery School at its core rather than Catholicism of the day. So he enticed the great Italian artists to come to him at Fontainebleau and created the art school there. And of course, he was the patron of Leonardo da Vinci. So you get two generations of incredible artists, incredible minds from Francis I, Henry II, and Diana, goddess of the hunt. And if you're in any doubt, buy the book. This woman was an athlete. She actually went running. She was an equestrian. She was proud to go hunting, but she was enacting her role as priestess, as goddess of the hunt. And she was in charge of Mary Stuart's early education. And though Mary Stuart, by all means, would never, ever pose for an image like this, Diane sure did, and often. She is the muse of Fontainebleau and was very proud of her body. But she played with I like to call it the filters of the day. She was a blonde. She had white hair. She had dark eyes. She had blue eyes, everything in between. So that leads up to a painting, which I haven't shown you, which is in the book, that is a key to the identity of Francis Bacon, the House of Stuart, which she merged her likeness with Mary Stuart. So now Mary Stuart would have never sat for this painting, never. She was a modest woman. She was a woman of faith. I believe that she definitely considered herself to be Catholic. Now, she also wanted to be a monarch of grace and allow people to worship in the way that they wished to. I fully believe that she would have allowed that given the chance. And she wanted to also hold her own faith. But within that, she also understood alchemy, which is what brings us to some of our next topics here. You'll see in the second slide that shows Francis Bacon standing up. I just wanted to share that while that's on my mind.
Let me bring that up real quick.
The second one is actually Francis wearing purple. Now, he was allowed to wear purple for his wedding day by his half-brother, the
Interesting.
king. And this is an unknown fact. Now, one of the things that I've explained in a video I've just finished that I will be posting tomorrow, it's about medieval customs and hierarchy. And it's actually to do with Eleanor of Aquitaine being represented as her maternal family crest in Royston Cave. And it's the entire 15 minutes worth of a breakdown on why it's Eleanor, and I can prove it.
I love it.
So here you have a man. Francis Bacon is wearing purple. Now royal purple, royal red, royal blue, silver thread, golden thread, jewels, ermine, furs. Fine fabrics, silks, you were not allowed to just pick them up and wear them. Everything was measured, weighed according to your station. Only the king could go all out. And nobody better show up to a court event looking better than him or her. And if you pretended to wear a crown, if you pretended to wear these colors, you could be arrested. You might even be executed, because the monarch was the representative on earth of God. And this is where pre-Civil War gets in, the English monarchy gets into some trouble, because, the divine right to rule was just taken a wee bit far, overriding documents like the Declaration of Arbroath or the Magna Carta. So, balance is always key in humanity. But so this is a unique event where an individual as highly placed in the court as Francis Bacon was, and he should not have been wearing purple for his wedding. That is just unheard of and scandalous. It means his brother let him out for air on his royal wedding day. So that's what that means. And followed up by the next image, slide 3, if you would. This is really interesting. I don't know if I'm the only one to have caught this or not, but his robes, what you're looking at are the 3 feathers of the Prince of Wales, which in effect, that should have been perhaps the role he would have been fulfilling. But those are the 3 feathers of the Prince of Wales that he is grandly portraying there, I believe. Now, he should have been, had things gone differently, and there was an immense, tragic conspiracy against Mary Stuart, and of course her young king, whom she dearly loved. They were in love, which was rare. He dies, of course, and we have our suspicions around that. So, nobody wants, Catherine de' Medici, we believe, did not want Francis to ascend to the throne and stay there, because Mary Stuart came with the Guise family, the power of the Guise family behind her. And that son would have ended up having the throne of Scotland, of France, and potentially maybe even someday of England. That would have been a powerful trio, triple crown. Powerful triple crown. But Catherine was all about, a martial son, a son that she could control. And of course, this young man dies, and we do not believe he was impotent. And indeed, Diane de Poitiers facilitated their getting together. And this mysterious painting, I won't show you because I want you to buy the book. There's a series of paintings that proves this, that she not only facilitated their meeting, their getting together, she wanted them to rule, which would have been better for her because, as soon as Henry II dies, she's kicked out and Catherine takes control. But so I can prove quite a lot through the painter Francois Clouet, whose paintings have gone unrecognized in relationship to this history for many years. And my 2 co-authors are able to triangulate through code and symbology. So we've covered a lot of ground. Now, will everyone agree with us? Absolutely not.
Sure.
But we humbly submit our findings to the authorship question, which has been in full swing for 150 some odd years, and it involves some of the greatest minds of the past.
Mark Twain was a doubter.
Yeah, and Prince Philip.
Yep.
As well. Ignatius Donnelly, who actually, the congressman who wrote about Atlantis, who voted for Greenwich Mean Time to be here in London versus in anywhere else. Not Washington, D.C., not Paris.
Yeah.
Greenwich Mean Time. And of course, that cuts right through Royston Cave as well. And he is the father. He is the reason, Ignatius Donnelly is the reason we're all having these conversations, I believe.
Well, and, once again, the esoteric nature of these things, Gretchen. I mean, especially because we're about to start getting into the alchemy part of things with Mary Stuart. And, the one thing that I love about alchemy is I deep dived into alchemical texts at the beginning of COVID. Like it just became, I had downloaded a bunch of PDFs and things like that to my tablet, and I just started voraciously tearing into things alchemical, and love it. I am a daily tarot user, not for any kind of divination or anything like that, but as a means of esoteric meditation, to look at an image and draw from it, an understanding, draw from it what the imagery might mean, how it might reflect my day, things like that. Kind of like grabbing a horoscope, something like that. You don't necessarily have to follow to the T what a horoscope is, but it's interesting to see the way that horoscope echoes throughout your day. So I use tarot cards much in that way, and when I look at images like this one specifically, that is Diana, there's some very obvious imagery there to show you that is the goddess of the hunt, not just like goddess of nature, that kind of stuff in their natural state, in a state of beauty, in a state of relaxation, in a state of grace right there. But notice the comfortability with death and mortality, because there are no eyes in that deer's head. That deer has no eyes in its head, folks. That is showing you that while this is graceful, while it's beautiful, it is deadly at the same time. That it is a force to be reckoned with. That it is comfortable. So comfortable with being a force to be reckoned with that it will use this corpse as a pillow to lean upon and comfort.
Well spotted. Memento mori. and we should be getting comfortable with that. We will all depart. We will all exit stage left, And one of the things I like about that painting too is that she's using the now famous M hand sign. Yep. And we have Scott Walter to thank for that. Now, that's always been ascribed to Mother Mary, but now we know and can ascribe it to Mary Magdalene, but also Cassiopeia, which I've
that's right.
proved in my first book. And is the W, is the M. She revolves around the polar star in the night sky, and is also evidence in an important arm sign in Freemasonry. So I just want to give him a quick shout out on that one.
Absolutely.
So he has changed our culture when it comes to that hand sign. So we have him to thank for that one. Speaking of citing other people's work, I will always cite your work.
Absolutely.
It's a badge of honor to me. Thank you for sharing that. I haven't lately, actually in a few good years, but I too used a tarot card deck, but what I discovered was that it wasn't showing me, this is going to happen tomorrow, that's going to happen, that's going to happen. It was always a reflection of what was happening internally, psychologically with me. Yep. That was interesting. Well, it was never divinational, but it was a mirror about my inner state. and where my head was. And I thought, oh my God, that's interesting.
And,
so,
I have, and we've had the conversation before on air. I remember bringing some tarot cards out at one point and showing them and just going through the actual Templar connection and the way that tarot cards teach an esoteric history within the major and minor arcana. When you start looking at those things, when you start looking at like literally the flag of death is like the rose, so it's fascinating to consider that, and even the meaning of the death card and the idea that there is the rose of the Rosicrucians with the Pope right in front, and the idea that like this is death and the death of something. It's the beginning of something else. It's the beginning of a new truth in your life, so the idea that the Rosicrucian rose is at a higher level than the Pope in the image, even subtleties like that, carrying on that esoteric tradition and the teachings of such things. It's really, really fascinating when you start getting into the history behind that stuff and why these cards are drawn the way that they are.
Wow, splendid. Thank you for bringing that up. And you'll see the unicorn behind me, and there are many reasons why I chose this. The tapestries work in very much the same way. These the unicorn of the hunt, there were two series, and actually the Rochefoucauld family owned one of them at one point, one series. And it's thought that Marie of Guise had a unicorn series of tapestries in Edinburgh Castle. They, of course, the originals are gone, but they've had new ones rewoven and put into place. But these were very large teaching tools of a similar fashion. And of course, according to the Bible, the unicorns actually didn't make it onto Noah's Ark, did they? Yeah. So that you're automatically talking about an otherworldly being. And during the medieval era, the unicorn is always Jesus. The unicorn is always Yeshua. And it's unfortunately, the unicorn hunt is very gruesome. It's a phallic symbol, of course, the horn is, and he's lured by a maiden of pure heart. And if she's not pure of heart, then he'll kill her. Typical, grim medieval stuff, as if Christ would kill anyone, Yeah. Come on, folks. But what it alludes to is, Mark Booth wrote a wonderful book called The Secret History of the World, and he cites in his book that the unicorn horn is actually an expression of inner sight, of inner sight of a powerful being, and Christ had that inner sight available to him, and that's why the unicorn became his symbol. But you have the unicorn as the House of Stuart's symbol. So so they're basically, this is the house of Christ.
Right in the background of the painting, right there is the unicorn.
Yeah. That was an addition I made, but it's and of course that blood is by marriage on the female side on the throne of the English throne, now. Just because a name ends doesn't mean the DNA ends. Yeah. And our Hanoverian prince who stepped in, George stepped in, he was married to a Stuart, Charles II's sister. So we do have Stuart DNA on the throne now. It's just that people want something else. Anyway, I digress. Excuse me.
That's okay.
I digress. Let's see, where should we go next with this? So we've talked about Francis Bacon. We've been talking about tapestries. Yes. Oh, I was so thrilled to see this. Now, William Russell's wife took this photograph, and sorry about the glare, but
That's okay.
sometimes you don't know what's important until you get it home. And that's what happened with this. This is embroidery work done by Mary Stuart. And they went on a mission together because of their proximity to this particular church, Cartmel Priory, and also the adjoining Holker Hall, with its Templar connections and esoteric connections, which you'll learn about in the book. But I fell in love with this image. The colors are bright. The workmanship is amazing. She was a true artist. And at one juncture, she actually said the needle and the thread is just as important. Now, I'm paraphrasing. She gave a speech about this, that it's just as important as stonework, as carvings, as a chisel and a hammer into stone. You know, a lot of us who focus on the Knights Templar, Templarism, we're always talking about architecture and Mason marks and, you know, deriving great meaning, you know, from this. And there is. But she did it with a needle and a thread in silver and gold and with high expensive fabrics that would stand the test of time, and it has. So you know, Mary Stuart absorbed alchemy from the court and at the teachings of Diane de Poitiers, and I'm convinced she did. So you see the phoenix here. Now, the phoenix is also the emblem of the Guise family, but it's also in alchemy, burning off the dross, the lead, the impurities of the soul to be reborn into a phoenix. And she creates a work. She's imprisoned. She's quite something. She's been described as being notoriously beautiful. Now, at 5'10", which is taller than most men of her day, quite slim. The woman can speak 5 languages. She's an athlete. She's people love to be around her. She's one of these magnetic characters that people just don't get enough of. And unfortunately, poor Elizabeth, who is in constant, you know, battle with her separately to be the queen bee, to be the fairy queen. Now, Elizabeth wins out. She does win out. And I don't think Elizabeth was quite right after the execution. I think she got bamboozled into it, and I think she had a nervous breakdown afterwards. But poor Elizabeth says to people, I don't know what the big deal is. I'm neither too tall. I'm neither too short. Why is everybody flocking around Mary Stuart? So there's definitely some competition there between the two of them. But Mary Stuart is imprisoned for many years and eventually loses the plot and gets herself caught up into believing that those who can rescue her are actually capable of doing so, and they're not. They're not up to the same level of spycraft that Elizabeth's court is capable of pulling off, which is very sad that there wasn't a way for there to be peace there. So she spends many years embroidering her history, her love, her loss into an incredible work that's called either the Marian hangings, the Augsburg Hall hangings, and they're comprised of 33 medallions, which is interesting. Yes, the life of Christ, but I'd like to take that even further, that we might be looking at an early form of Freemasonry, an early form of Rosicrucian information here. I won't go into it all, but the whole book is filled with early examples of Rosicrucian information, which I believe Mary Stuart was privy to. So you've got some interesting things at play here. These medallions were sewn onto originally a green velvet background, which has disintegrated. But there were a combination of octagonal, and also you see the equilateral cross here. And this is the French form of a cross pâté. So, and if you're interested in the Knights Templar and you hear cross pâté, you're hearing right. So I'm one of these proponents that the Knights Templar went underground and resurfaced as the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons.
Yep.
So what you're seeing here is the French version of the cross pâté. So she fills 33 medallions, of which this is one, of octagons and cross pâtés of motifs, as well as a major central square image that I'll show you later on. Now
and
the
W and M featured again as well.
Yeah, you see that play out throughout. Her work is filled with codes, and she is a master craftsman. Now she hired, it's amazing. She's under house arrest, but she's got money. And unfortunately, she's expensive to keep. So her captors are having to pay for all of this, but she also has agents in France who are sending her specific fabrics, specific threads, for this coded work of art that she's hoping will stand the test of time, and it does. This is a very sad motif here. You see two trees. Now this is you'll see a tree on either side, which is very interesting if you start thinking in terms of Freemasonry of these trees as being columns. And you see a hand coming from above down, to the ground, and it's cutting the roots of one of the trees.
Sure.
And that would be Francis, her husband, who she dearly loved and truly mourned. And the tree on the right retains its roots, and she lives. So, this is about his death. And unfortunately, it seemed to be fated as an act of God allowed this to take place. But this was at the hands of Catherine de Medici. So that's I think this is a very poignant image, and that would have been one of the rare larger square pieces. I think there were only a couple. The rest were the medallions, the 33 medallions. So we have that, and let's see, Diane again. So the V&A there. Now I pulled these off the V&A website, the Victoria and Albert Museum. They guard their images very carefully, and they should. They should. I had to rely upon a book from 1923, and these photos from 1923 were so old and so awful. But one does their best. But it's just not possible to get permission to use these for the book. I can do that for you here because I'm not charging. So in the upper left, you've got the unicorn in the French version of the cross pâté. And you've got a sea beastie in the middle. You've got a tiger. In the lower left, you've got a beehive. And this goes back into the discussion of the queen bee, because all hives have a queen bee. Yeah. And the queen bee becomes a very important conversation in the Elizabethan court. And presents itself in court masks, the fairy queen. And again, Elizabeth and Mary Stuart were vying for that. Who is going to be the alchemical queen? And I'll let you ponder that conversation. On the far right, lower right, you see a dolphin, and that is a homage to the again to her prince, the King of France, the Dauphin. That the dolphin being the emblem of the French crown. So this is an interesting one. This is these are marigolds, and marigolds follow the sun. And this is a tribute to Marguerite Navarre, the sister of Francis I, who built what I believe was the new Rome in France, the patron of Leonardo da Vinci. Now, Mary Stuart would have spent time reading the book written by Marguerite Navarre. Now, Marguerite, oh my God, what an intellectual. She was able to translate Hebrew writing. She spoke several languages, translated texts. She was quite a mind, but she and her brother were a double act. And, those two are incredible. You'll see in the book a painting of both of them being portrayed with a parrot, which is really interesting in itself. But you get this incredible, sorry about that. That's an
it's not gonna
happen, isn't it? Anyway,
that's epic.
Here you have the king of, sorry about that. Here you have the King of France, portrayed as John the Baptist, with his hands in a symbolic pose. Finger pose. So he gets captured. He's imprisoned. His battle with the Holy Roman Emperor doesn't go well. The Holy Roman Emperor wants his lands, and so he's in prison. And so Marguerite gets on a horse, ditches her husband at that juncture, and says, "You let him fall into enemy hands. How dare you?" So, her husband is back from battle, beat up, not doing well. So rather than tending to him, she rides off after her brother and rides through the night, gets to the castle where her husband, where her brother is being held prisoner by the Holy Roman Emperor. And she actually tries to break him out, and it fails. Wow. But the emperor just looks at her and says, "Wow, I really respect you. No. Let's talk about how we can let him go." He walks out of there, with her. And then some time later, the emperor visits Fontainebleau to have a tour and is the guest of him there. Marguerite is a force to be reckoned with, but she writes a poignant book called Mirror of the Sinful Soul, and it nearly kills her. And the reason she wrote it is that her husband dies, her son dies, and she's got survivor guilt, and she's blaming herself. Now, today, we understand that. So instead of going to a priest, however, she pours herself out into this book. And the priests of the Sorbonne are so offended, they call for her execution. They want to put her in a bag and throw her off the bridge into the River Seine. So thank goodness she's, the princess of the crown, and her brother saves her life, prevents that from happening. And he in turn arrests these individuals who are calling for her execution as a heretic, and he executes them instead. So this book survives, and the next generation inherits it. Mary Stuart comes across it. Anne Boleyn takes it to the court of Henry VIII. And of course, Elizabeth inherits it. Elizabeth I publishes it. But the mirror of the sinful soul has an impact on Mary Stuart as well. So this is a work of heresy at the time. Reading it now, it's just gut-wrenching. It's basically full of self-recrimination that there must have been something wrong with Marguerite to have lost her husband and her son. So we would think nothing of it today.
Well, and, you know, that was a very oft concept in older society, especially in older religious society, was the idea of sins of the fathers, things like that, of that kind of stuff befalling you because of things that your ancestors had done, grandparents, things like that. And one of the things that I just wanted to point out as we were talking esoteria, things like that, I noticed amongst these that the W, and specifically in the image that I'm about to show, which is also in the book, but in black and white in the book, and I didn't notice it until it was in full color in front of my face. But there is a concept specifically in Solemnic magic called sigils. And basically what you're doing is taking the letters of things, stuff like that. Now, in Hebrew, you have no vowels, so it's typically just the consonants, and you're taking those consonants, you're putting them together as a matrix of things, much like in the Phoenix image here, how you see the W and the M on top of each other, as above, so below, you know, in esoteric tradition. But when you start coming over here, that starts taking on a different character. If you notice that W and M are now over each other and they are surrounded by a circle. And specifically, when you get over here, that W and M are surrounded by a circle and they have dots at their points of intersection. Those dots at the point, like, that is what makes it a magical sigil to me. The fact that they have empowered this now with power, and not only that, but the fact of, especially in ritualistic magic, things like that, you are typically sewing your garments. Any symbol going onto there, you are imbuing with every stitch. Yeah. Gretchen. Yeah. So the idea of proper witchery in that kind of way, like esoteric witchery, the idea of like, I'm going to make my wife well by making this stew. And with every cut that I make, I'm going to put in the thought that she is getting well. You know, every potato I cut now has that love and that thought imbued into it. And yeah, that makes the stew a potion in that kind of way. And that was very much an alchemical teaching. That was very much an alchemical teaching. The idea that like you are imbuing yourself into this work. So the idea that this has now evolved into a sigil beyond a family seal, beyond a representation of familial initial or anything like that, it's now become something else.
Yeah. Yeah, and that she has chosen to do that with the memory of Marguerite de Navarre.
Yeah,
because of who she was, and the belief that she could go straight to God without a priest.
Yeah.
And so, you know, Mary Stuart is following in that path. And yes, there's the high ceremonial, you know, magic, and you get one of the things they've discovered here in multiple royal residences when they're digging up floorboards and looking at cross beams to repair flooring is one of the royal residences where James was staying. The original builders put hatch marks in, and hatch marks were meant to catch evil spirits to protect the monarch. So the carpenter was secretly imbuing the room with protection by creating this circle that was full of these scores of lines, hoping that it would catch a demon or a negative or an evil intent.
Evil thought or intent.
Protect their king, or queen or whoever was staying there. But you see that repeated through royal residences throughout the UK. It's really interesting to see that. And this is what you were just saying is a higher form of that. That includes, that's an 8-sided structure. And you get that in Royston Cave. The floor is octagonal. Templars built in octagonals. They built in round, and that's the 8 directions, not just 4. So you're calling in, angelic forces into the center there, and also the sun in this case. And the sun is blessing those marigolds, and the marigolds are following the sun, which is a Christ image.
Yeah. And just once again, fascinating knowledge being transferred to the, once again, that Rosicrucian root in that kind of way to the Merovingian bloodline. The idea that, there is connection to that within this.
It's a persistent, and I will say this, I'll leave it to my 2 co-authors to go into this. I approach it from a historical point of view, first century text point of view, and art history, but they can give you chapter and verse on codes that goes into all of this. So we have, all 3 of us, attempted to triangulate our information through different modalities, painting, statuary, architecture, embroidery, and there she is. There's Marguerite. That's my fanciful representation of her. If she were walking and talking to us, amazing woman.
Well, and this whole book is just full of fascinating and amazing information, Gretchen. Once again, I know you have been locked away for almost 2 years with it.
2 years and about 4 months. And I have to admit, I feel I've been certainly living under a rock at the expense of everything else. And I'm grateful to be free of it, because now I've got some catching up to do on multiple fronts, as you and I spoke of earlier.
Well, I'm just happy to finally have you on to be able to reveal this information, to be able to get this information out there, because I think it's massively important. It was funny, before we came in to record this, Gretchen, all of about 2 weeks ago, I mentioned to my wife that, I want to start quietly watching the Great Courses series with my son. He's 8, he's going on 9, but he watches some pretty deep stuff with me. While we play dominoes, things like that. It'll be on in the background. And before we came in here, the Great Courses popped up, and the name of the course was How Jesus Became God. And he was like, hey, I want to watch that with you. Of his own volition, fully of his own. And I was like, okay. So we started watching it, but it's literally, and if you're not familiar with Great Courses, folks, go check it out. We have a great guest, Richard B. Spence, on here, who's done numerous courses for the Great Courses, but they're all professors. They're all lettered degree professors of archaeology, things like that. I have watched, I have taken a 10-course lecture series with an astrophysicist from MIT. Just studying astrophysics for a 12-lecture series, things like that. So it's great to hear these professors talking about no, really, none of the actual 12 people with Jesus thought that he was divine. They were just everyday kind of people who followed him. And it was fascinating to see that, and to see this course out there that's talking about, the divinity came a little bit later. It wasn't really and truly in real time in that kind of way. The thought of that came later, and when you start thinking about it in that kind of way, when you start thinking about it in the ways and means of, why would Mary Magdalene leave? Why would Mary Magdalene go so far away? Things like that. She was at that point a missionary of the message, no different than any of the others who followed him, you know? So yeah, it's interesting to see that. It's interesting to see, how these histories get obfuscated in that kind of way because of message. Even the idea of Mary Magdalene, we wouldn't be having this conversation, Gretchen, if it weren't for revelations and even ideas of Mary Magdalene that really weren't accepted until 2000, right up around there. You know, where people started considering looking at the relationship of Mary Magdalene and the true history of Mary Magdalene in a totally different kind of way.
I'm grateful that the Pope, was it 1969, said that we needed to elevate her feast day to being mandatory. And in the Eastern Orthodox Church, she was never a streetwalker. But unfortunately, you know, the damage is done. The Reformation movements keep propelling this weird story forwards. She was never a streetwalker. Yeah. And yet, you know, and unfortunately, with as wonderful production values as there are in the TV series The Chosen, you know, that is just, it just keeps getting perpetuated. Yeah. And you know, you look at the Bible in Ethiopia with its 88 books. You know, the first kingdom, first Christian kingdom. It's an ancient Christian kingdom. You know, she's not a streetwalker in their world. It's just us. We're the ones hung up on it in the West. Yeah. But that she was, you know, the traditions in southern France, the cave around Saint Baume, you know, the Casamite monks that took up residence there in 410 AD. They believed she was there. Yeah. They believed she taught from there, that she baptized from there, that she continued from there. You know, that has persisted over the centuries. That's early. You know, that's early. Yeah. But that they were imbued with meditation practices that, you know, the one thing humanity has around the entire globe is that we're all built the same. We all have a central nervous system, and that central nervous system, you know, with the right meditation practices can heighten one's intuition, can heighten one's inner sight, can bring greater peace in one's life. You know, it's interesting. You know, the conversation. And if you look at the early Dark Age saints or the early medieval saints, the numbers of individuals that were walking on water, be they male or female, raising the dead, healing. Yeah. You know, it was almost comical how much of this was being discussed. And then, of course, in order to tighten things down, well, we only want Jesus to be able to do these things. So we're going to put our focus on him as the only one capable of doing these things. Well, what if we are all able to experience spontaneous healing? There are so many messages around the world of you know, you go in, you know, you're terminally ill, you go in for an operation the next day and the problem's gone. How did that happen? Spontaneous remission. So these are all wonderful mysteries.
And I have held for years and years the fact of if you'd like to trace the death of Christ down to something, divinity, no divinity, what have you, make no mistake, you had to be something special for the Sanhedrin and the teachers to be listening to you at yeshiva school and at 12 years old. All right.
Indeed.
So he may have been a very advanced Kabbalah student. something like that. You start reading a lot of the big red words. There's a lot of Kabbalah in there. There's a lot of direct connection to the divine. You can talk to God. Here's how to talk to God. Here's the prayer to directly address him.
Exactly.
Those were things that you went to the high priest for, that you went and, hey, if it was really important, you purchased a ram. If not so important, you purchased a rabbit, but the temple got a cut of that money. As a matter of fact, the day that we are recording this, folks, it is it is Palm Monday. Yesterday, or today, actually, yesterday was Palm Sunday. Today is the day that Jesus turned the tables over. Literally. This is the day. Palm Monday was the day that he went up and said, you have turned this into a den of vipers. You've from the prophets. And the idea that a direct connection was provided divinely to the divine, and every one of us took part in it, that was dangerous to the status quo. Whether you say you're king of the Jews or not, that is dangerous to the status quo of the temple. And at that point, if you're going to cause disruption to the local religion, that was the one thing that actually the Romans were pretty down with. We're going to come in, we're going to build temples. We may like your temple that's already there, and we're going to take it over and turn it into a temple to Diana. All right, go build you another temple somewhere else, but you can have your God, just make sure to pay your tax to us. So the fact that there was some kind of rabble rousing going on amongst the Sanhedrin and amongst the people because of this is why they got involved. They didn't care either way about anything else. Even Pilate said that. He's like, I don't care. You want to say you're king of the Jews, you feel free. Just make sure to pay your taxes. All right, king? So it was the fact that he was sharing a truth that was different. He was sharing a truth that was a direct connection and bypassed those points of connection and those points of control that doesn't matter if you wear a collar or if you're part of the Sanhedrin or what have you.
And he welcomed
the humanity
he
can get in the way.
Women were the core drivers of his movement.
Every one of them.
And I fully believe she was meant to lead the church. Yeah. And things got changed. But he says, go into your closet and pray. Yeah. So that, it fits right along with what you were saying. And thank you for saying all of that. Yeah. That's important and quite a synchronicity for our recording. Yeah, here. Right. Go into your closet. Don't perform. That's right. That's not going to win you any points. Go and be that prayer, that meditation, become. Yeah. And that's what we were meant to do, and that's why Marguerite Navarre got into trouble, and that's why all these women got into trouble. That's right. Every one of them. Yeah, in one way or another. So it's what has the research I've done over the years. What I've found to be so interesting is perhaps I'm off beam here, but you get into the relevance of the sea beast, the Merove, the first Merovingian king. His father was a sea beast. Well, you've got this powerful figure, who's the father of the first Merovingian. But author Gareth Knight believes that Melusine's story goes back to Brittany, France, at around the same time the Merovingian story comes into play. So Melusine is actually the female side of that story. So you've got two mer beings, if you will. And, the Rochefoucalds, they probably could have been king anytime they wanted to. Their symbol is Melusine, the mermaid, and she can transform from either a walking woman to a mermaid to a dragon. But what's interesting about this is that it's about swimming on the inner planes. It's about swimming through consciousness, and that's what that tale represents. And they were the fisher kings. They were the top of the food chain. The dolphin, the same way, is the top of the food chain in imagery. So they're not the fishes that the fisher king is harvesting. Be ye a fisher of a fisher of men. They're not the followers. They're the ones that are the lineage holders, and they're the ones that have the capacity to pass on powerful meditation techniques where healing does happen. That's the trio, the Melusine that you saw, Mary Magdalene in the middle, and of course the bad girl of the piece, Lilith, and all of them make an appearance in this book. For various reasons, and all in Baconian code, which was a shock to all three of us. And the Lilith connection, I won't go into any depth here, but when that was presented to me by William and by John, that the implications of that hit home, and I was affected by that viscerally for 3 days, because she is such a controversial figure amongst people of faith. And we had long conversations. Do we include this? Do we not include this? What do we do with this? And we realized that if anybody were to pick up where William left off, somebody would eventually come to the same conclusions that he did, that John Edwards did, and we might as well just come out with it.
Yeah.
And we had a discussion about her, and it's throughout history, women have always been demonized, either literally or in Mary Magdalene's case, through character assassination in the West, purposeful character assassination. And going all the way back to Constantine, who isn't quite the villain everybody thinks he is in the Mary Magdalene story, and that shocked me as well. So that's going to raise some eyebrows as well. But women are always being subjected as the bad guys, as a scapegoat because of original sin, and with the misinterpretation there, is so profound. We are here for a brief time to learn, to grow, to master ourselves, and be stewards of this earth, and to be stewards of each other, whether we're male or female, and we all have something we can bring to the table. I had a profound experience. I've mentioned this to you before. I nearly died of septicemia. I was misdiagnosed. I had I should have had appendicitis surgery. Misdiagnosed, unfortunately, walked around for over a year with an appendicitis, and God knows how I did that. But and I think I'm still dealing with the effects of that. But I was at work. I suddenly everything changed. And it was really like the classic LSD trip, where I'm looking at my hand, and I'm in wonder, I'm in awe, and I'm looking around me, and everything is being held together. The desk, the chair, everything mundane that is around us, imbued with golden light, and it is unconditional love. And it is filled with so much unconditional love that we, on an individual basis, can't absorb it. And I was approached by what I later realized were two beings. And I couldn't see them, but I knew there were two. I couldn't hear a voice, but I was being asked a series of questions, and I felt such intense, unconditional love. And literally given a choice. Do you want to come home? What is your reason for staying? And I knew I was dying.
Wow.
And I knew, they said, if you want to come home, just go home and go to bed and everything will be okay. Do you have a reason to be here? And I said, well, I'm young. My family would miss me. I'm one of 6 and a large extended family. And they said, okay, well, it sounds like there would be a hole left in these lives. So, you need to understand you're dying and you need to do something about it right now. So this incredible love I've never felt before, I've never felt afterward, since. I try to call it to me by visualizing everything around me with that golden light that I know is also infused with white light and unconditional love, or by placing my hand here. And that has just done so much for me over the years. Yeah. And I don't do it enough. So I must go into my closet and do this more. So I was in surgery that afternoon.
Wow.
I almost checked out. So I fully believe, and in my first book, I quote a double PhD who, there it is. Yeah, this man put his career in University of Arizona in peril. Can't remember his name offhand, but who has 2 PhDs? This guy does. But he developed a system for testing near-death experience, tens and tens of thousands, and they all hold the same pattern. So I just want to say that this book is Codes of the Hidden King. It is as much an academic piece as I could muster. So is my first book, as much of an academic piece as William Russell could throw at it, with just sheer logic, math, and Elizabethan code work, and the same with John Edwards, who has a master's in education. But behind it is the why. And the why of Oak Island, but the why is our inheritance of light and love that all as human beings are imbued with, outside of dogma, outside of religion. And I know this without a shadow of a doubt, and no one ever can take this away from me. Yeah. No one can take this away from me. And there should be no fear when approaching the source of creation.
Truth.
And if you're worried about anything you've done, then figure it out and do it again.
That's right. That's right. As the motto for our previous incarnation of this show used to be, if you can't be good at it. Exactly. So, there's no fear in love, and fear is a human construct to keep people in line. And, I think that Mary Magdalene needs to be restored. A lot of her story has been obscured, and I think that she knew that it's been said that she was given deeper secrets, deeper knowledge, and as the head of the original head of the church, would have imparted to us. Had she been allowed to. Yep. And, I bring it up to people all the time. You didn't see one of the guys showing up to tend to the body afterward.
No. No, and they were all hiding in an upper room. Yeah. Now, granted, they were men. They might have been arrested. But the women pulled it off at their peril, and they got through it, and they brought the money to the table. They made things happen, and for the first 3+ centuries, they were deacons. And John Edwards discovered this.
That's absolute truth.
They were deacons, and they were removed from that role through the processes of different councils, the Council of Nicaea, and on up through St. Augustine. You know, there is that beautiful golden thread that runs through Christianity, whether it's the Catholic Church, whether it's whatever church, the golden thread is there. And we don't seek to destroy, we want to add to. You know, if one is holding faith, I have nothing against religious institutions at all. They are so good at community outreach. They're the ones that show up after a tornado. They're the ones that show up at hospital beds to help people through cancer. You know, these are people, you know, who truly take their Christian message to their hearts and try to live their life in that way. But I just want to say that with my own personal experience and through studying quantum mechanics in my first book and the work of others, you know, who have had near-death experiences, it's not like we've been taught through fear tactics of the medieval era that sidelined women and that tried to fear people into going to church every Sunday.
That's right.
You know,
that's right.
Go because you want to be more in love with
Go
life.
for the connection. Go for the connection. And that's just it. Go for finding that common thread with your common man. And go with the idea, Gretchen, gold threads are beautiful. They're supposed to be seen with a light shown on them, you know?
Absolutely.
And that's what you guys have done with this. That's what you guys have done with Codes of the Hidden King, I believe, is y'all have really taken these golden threads that have been embroidered and, like we said, imbued stitch by stitch with these teachings, with these thoughts, with these beliefs, with these feelings, and you have put a proper light on them. You have literally shown them to the world in a different way. So congratulations to all three of you. I am only a third of the way done with the book right now. And let me tell you, folks, there is 500 pages of data in this 300 pages. It is, and to the point that there are hyperlinks. There are actual links to show the work. Okay. It's one thing to have bibliographies. It's another thing to cite your work as you move throughout a piece of research. So the fact that you guys have done that is beautiful and amazing, Gretchen, because you really get to see where you guys are pulling this from, that you aren't just pulling these ideas and concepts out of your own, that you are leaning on the work of other people, that this is a true peeling back of centuries of data that has been esoterically hidden. So kudos to all of you guys. It is a beautiful, beautiful job.
Thank you. It's so important to give credit where credit is due. And, you know, if we could have done more when it came to indexing and bibliography work, the truth is that this is an expensive book to print. And unfortunately, you know, our friends in Europe, Australia, Canada, they're buying the Cadillac of this book through another company, and it is more expensive. It is on more expensive paper, but Amazon won't print color for any other country except for the UK and the US. And it is it's a lesser grade paper as well. So the Cadillac is being sold on a heavier grade paper, but we wanted to offer as much as we could the feeling of the great masters of the past, and some which we've discovered ourselves who are unsung, what it might be to be in the presence of that original artwork, in the presence of that artist or that statue, and we hope it walks off the page towards you. So this isn't something, you know, our hearts are in this. We pray that you won't, you know, this is a resource and meant to be artistic and to also restore balance between men and women, you know, not favoring one over the other, but this is divine, sacred masculine, sacred feminine, both.
You know, I
we
think
need both.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
We need both.
Yeah.
You know, you can't have one without the other. And for that, you know, I will speak to you know, that Trinity is Father, and Holy Ghost being mother, child, you know, Father, mother, child. And that's how things play out here on earth. And that's not to disparage anyone's desire for their identity and how they see themselves. But when you're talking about procreation, that's how it shakes down. So those emotional forces can create in your life in other ways. But, you know, when it comes to creating a human being, that's how it goes down. So, but that's the, you know, and Mary Magdalene and Jesus emulated that on earth. And these royal families across Europe did their best to hook their trolley onto that train and either hook themselves into Melusine or to that imagery. Some people making up their own lineages to try to achieve that supposedly evil. Melusine was considered evil. Richard Lionheart, he liked to go around saying, yeah, I'm related to the devil. You know, maybe it helped him pick up girls. I don't know. Or, you know, but, you know, he was quite the lad himself. But this all, you know, the Order of the Garter, I know we're over our hour.
That's okay. It's okay.
The Order of the Garter says, you know, shame on him who thinks evil of it. And what is a garter? It's round, it's circular, and that's the image of a woman. And it falls off the thigh of a woman at a ball. And Edward III picks it up and, saving her honor, puts it on his thigh and says, shame on him who thinks evil of it. Yeah. So what? You think this is wrong? She, you know, it wasn't her fault. It fell off of her leg, and we saw her ankle. Shock, horror. Come on, let's get a grip, everybody. So, you know, Edward III decides to become a protector of sacred feminine principles of chivalry, and is the historic Arthurian king reborn with Templar knights in his court, you know, in his tow. But that's another story.
Well, and you guys get into that in the book. You get into the connection, especially to the idea of one land, one king. As it's said in Excalibur, the idea that the monarch is connected to the land. Y'all get into that with Elizabeth I, all kinds of things. So it's very fascinating to see some of the Arthurian legend that y'all peel back with that. And the connection in that kind of way that goes back once again to her being the fairy queen, all kinds of things. So these esoteric traditions were once again woven into the daily life of those in court. You were woe to find somebody of royal court that didn't either have an alchemist or was practicing alchemy of some sort, or didn't have an astrologer or was following astrology themselves. You know, these were things that were common practice for those of court at the time. So once again, the peeling back that you guys have done, the years of research, I love the fact that, yes, I would agree with you. I think that this is much more a research reference than it is anything else, because you guys have laid forth a framework to literally research this from so many different angles and put forth the data and the connections, and not just saying it like many researchers do, but here's where we pulled that data from, find out for yourself, and even come up with your own hypothesis. So it really is much more than just a story, much more than just a laying out of the facts of Francis Bacon being possibly related to that Merovingian bloodline, things like that. So thank you once again for it's been well worth the wait, Gretchen, is what I can say as a host.
Yeah, in brief, in brief, the idea that the one thing that Oak Island researchers talk about is Francis Bacon's discussion of preserving documents in Mercury, or preserving a body in Mercury. So, is that what we're looking at?
Yep.
Interred on the island.
Yeah.
At some point. So, as a miniature Temple of Solomon, what was interred there, and a lot of there's the Baconian crowd in in Oak Island Research,
yep.
And then there's the Templar crowd, and I'm grateful to have this opportunity through John Edwards and William Russell to step into the Baconian world, because I've been firmly rooted in the Vikings and the Templars.
Yeah.
And our work converged, and grateful for it. I know that I'm talking you into the ground. And
it's okay.
So happy.
I have no problem. I'm happy to be speaking to you once again, because this has been a long time coming. I have been in the shadows and watching and seeing, and we've had conversations on the side as things have moved forward, all kinds of stuff. So to see it finally come to fruition, to have it in my hand, to be reading it as we speak, it's absolutely amazing. Before we let you go, Gretchen, let everybody know where they can go to get their copy of Codes of the Hidden King, where they can go to follow you, where they can go to keep up with all of the amazing work that is Gretchen Cornwall.
Oh, thank you. Please, the website is forthcoming. The URL is in the book, but for the now, please visit my website, GretchenCornwall.com. I will be putting up a page for the book. There are blogs about it on my site at the moment. Amazon. You can take the ISBN number to your local library and get them to buy you a copy. If you can't afford a copy, it's tight right now, but you'd be doing us a huge favor if you can get your librarian to buy this book. Yep. Once librarians trust another librarian, they start buying the book, and then that gets out there for free then. So you'd be helping us on that. I spend most of my time on Facebook, Gretchen Cornwall on Facebook. And we have started a group for the book, Codes of the Hidden King. But you can find all three authors on Facebook. I'm the one who is usually shamelessly out there posting most of the time. But so Facebook, my website, and we'll be putting out more as time goes on. We've done a soft launch, but we're looking forward to getting things out, more information out there continually. And I'm just thrilled to be talking to you here with you and with Christopher on Curious Realm. And just happy. Always
great having you on the show, Gretchen. Truly, once again, this is a tour de force. It is and I can't wait to see what comes of your other information that you sent me in the background, because that is more than exciting.
I appreciate your being a sounding board for me on
absolutely.
That. I don't know what form that will take. Eventually, I've got enough for a book on that. I have a video dropping tomorrow. It'll be out by Wednesday.
It will be shared to the group.
Yeah, it's about Royston Cave, and there is a discussion going around about this particular carving as being Lady Roysia, and this particular carving is not Lady Roysia, and I can prove it. And I'm happy to use my multidisciplinary approach on how I came across this discovery. And it's a 15-minute video, and I would be thrilled if you would watch it. And I'll share it to your group if you don't mind.
Absolutely, and always feel free.
I'm very focused on history and academia, and it's important that everything is grounded in reality and in what we know about history. So you can't just go around making stuff up. What you can say is, well, we've got evidence for this, and this is what the evidence has formed our thoughts on this.
That's
and
right.
This is what we might think or believe based on evidence we've gathered, and we've done our best to let others beat us up over it, and we have in this particular book. But to just simply make something up, that's just not helpful to respective followers, especially when there's a known historical reason for something to be portrayed in a particular way. But, we all know, forgive me, I'm waffling on, but,
That's all right.
I was just thrilled to have been invited to be the premiere episode of The Curse of Oak Island in 2022. It was just fantastic. And to have Marty Lena, Alex, and Charles Barkhouse, a historian of Oak Island with deep connections to Freemasonry, to come and see the cave, and the look on Charles's face when he came out. He wasn't supposed to go down there on his own. He was supposed to wait because the camera wanted him, that first expression. But he snuck down there and he came up and priceless. And one of the reasons why I appeared was because this carving is undisputedly Eleanor of Aquitaine. And because of my research through Oak Island and the Rochefoucauld family, having been to the chateau myself, I made a discovery of an important carving there, several carvings actually, all based in Melusine. I realized that Eleanor was being depicted as a mermaid. And the reason that's important is because her maternal side is the Rochefoucauld family. They've been in that chateau for 900 years. 900 years.
Wow.
Through two world wars, 3 revolutions, plagues, Vikings, everything. And but they've thought so highly of Eleanor's maternal side that she's depicted in Royston Cave as a mermaid. And Melusine is in code, Baconian code as well. And that blew us out of the water.
I was incredibly and awesomely impressed to see that was in the book, Gretchen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Especially granted our conversations over the last couple of years and regarding the cave and Eleanor of Aquitaine, and because you came on the show and discussed Royston Cave and Eleanor of Aquitaine and Melusine and everything else previously. So the fact that it was in there and encoded as well, once again, this is a great and beautiful edition that you guys have put out. Thank you so much for your time today and for the extended time today. Truly, it's been beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hold the line real quick while we close things out with the audience, Gretchen. While you are online, checking out all of the amazing work of Gretchen Cornwall, as well as her co-authors for Codes of the Hidden King, John Edwards and William Russell, folks. Make sure to stop on by Curious Realm. CuriousRealm.com is where you can like, follow, subscribe. That is where you can, if you're not a fan of Facebook or YouTube, things like that, folks, you can tune in live on our website every single Tuesday night. We have an embedded player. You can tune in right there without the use of social media, all that kind of stuff. So that is also where you can find your link to Curious Research and the Curious Research Field Observation and Encounter Log. If you are a researcher in the world of paranormal, cryptozoology, UFO, UAP, this is your pocket-sized field guide to write down the data of your experiences as they happen in the field so that your data is scientifically ready to shake hands with science come the day that you need to do so. Thank you so much, as always, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you so much for your open hearts, your open minds. That is what makes the conversation. Without the conversation, humanity does not march forward. So remember, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and stay curious. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of The Curious Realm. Stay tuned for more guests, forbidden topics, and hidden truths. Follow us on social media by searching Curious Realm. To download the official Curious Realm app and view the Knowledge Vault, or become a sponsor of Curious Realm, visit our website at curiousrealm.com. Curious Realm is available on your favorite podcast and video services, curiousrealm.com, as well as KGRA Radio, APR TV, and the official Curious Realm app for Roku devices. Curious Realm is a proud member of the Ground Zero Media family of podcasts. For more shows and members-only content, visit groundzeroplus.com today. Thanks for listening. Stay curious, and remember, the other side is always watching.